And if this is your first time giving your mind a little love, I have a few goodies for you. First, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And second, sign up for the Morning Mind Love. Think of it like a weekday oracle from your highest self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, you'll get 2 gifts absolutely free: a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up. Welcome to Mind Love, episode 283. Today's episode is all about unlocking the power of self-healing with 4 essential mindfulness techniques.
Self-hatred isn't fertile ground for our healing. And so when I think about self-forgiveness, I think about grace and possibility of healing and compassion. I think about how I would show up for my kids if they made a mistake, when they make mistakes. I love them through it. You know what I mean? And it's like, how do we as adults love ourselves through the crazy shit we've done, the things we've been through, the places we've been that may not have been in alignment with what we said we wanted? Like, how do we soften with ourselves? And so for me, being kind to myself by writing love notes to myself. And I thought it was so dumb when my therapist first told me, like, why don't you write some love notes to yourself? And I'm like, why would I do that? But that really changed my life.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
If this is your first time giving your mind a little love, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Mind love is a habit, and the more you give your mind that love and intention, the better you'll feel about yourself and your life. Plus, it's really a win-win because more subscribers means Mind Love attracts even more amazing guests to bring you their wisdom. So don't forget to subscribe. Do you believe you have the ability to heal yourself? Or maybe we should back up. What even comes to mind when you hear the word heal? Is it always in reference to something physical? Because for me, anything that disrupts my sense of peace is something that could use healing. Whatever we're looking to heal, back pain, migraines, cancer, or anxiety, inner peace, or lack of purpose, our minds play a powerful part in the process. And I know it's easy to doubt that that's possible, especially when we're in the middle of it, because when we're in survival mode, it's really hard to access optimism. It's actually impossible to access anything outside of the fight or flight response. But it is possible to train our nervous systems to come out of that response and even go into it less often. And it's also possible to heal ourselves, even with the physical things. It's always funny to me when people look at me with skepticism when I talk about our ability to self-heal, because it's actually a scientific fact that placebos work in as many as 30 to 60% of patients. And think about that. Usually a placebo only involves a sugar pill or a saline injection. But people have so much belief that something is finally coming to help them that they convince their minds or bodies to heal. Just the belief that something will have an effect creates the effect. Now imagine that this belief doesn't just come from sugar or saline, but it comes from actually understanding yourself so that you can access your true power. You get clear on what's causing your self-sabotage or your doubts, whether it's your mindset or your lifestyle, and then you start to make conscious changes. Or you dive deep into your trauma to change your relationship with it and with yourself. I wonder how powerful your beliefs will be then. Probably powerful enough to change the way you feel, right? And probably powerful enough to affect your decisions moving forward, right? To me, that's real sustainable healing. It not only changes how we are in this life, but it also changes what you believe yourself to be capable of, how you handle problems in the future, how you make choices, how you understand yourself. Rather than just looking outside of yourself for a magic pill or someone to come save you, you actually develop the tools to save yourself. So that's what we're learning about today. Our guest is Alex Elle. She's an author, certified breathwork coach, and restorative writing teacher, and her latest book is How We Heal. Writing came into her life by way of therapy and the exploration of healing through journaling and mindfulness, and the whole intention behind Alex's work is to build community and self-care practices through literature and language. So she teaches everything from workshops, courses, and retreats to assist people in finding their voices and create clarity in their lives and relationships. So 3 key things we will learn are how to tend to self-doubt and make room for new beginnings, how to befriend our fear so it no longer controls us, and how to reclaim our power by leaning into what feels good. When you're growing a business, most people think the hardest part is getting clients or making money. But I think it's finding people who actually care about the work as much as you do. And I've been there. I've posted a job, got 100 applications, and maybe 3 of them actually read the job description. And it's kind of soul crushing when you're trying to build something that actually matters. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen by other job sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs help you stand out and hire fast. With sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates so that you can reach the people you want faster. And it makes a huge difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. One of the things I love about Indeed is that it just makes hiring so fast because you're reaching people who actually are looking for work, not just casually browsing. Plus, with Indeed sponsored jobs, there's no monthly subscriptions, no long-term contracts, and you only pay for results. And guess how fast it is? In the minute I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. There's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/mindlove. Just go to Indeed.com/mindlove right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/mindlove. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. I used to be one of those people who had grand plans for a big healthy meal every Sunday night, and I'd make these elaborate meal plans, buy all the ingredients, and then Wednesday would roll around and I'd be staring at that wilted spinach, ordering takeout again. Shopping, planning, and cooking food really can be simple and stress-free, and that's why I love Hungry Root. Hungry Root takes stress out of mealtime by filling your cart with personalized picks and planning your week of meals, getting smarter with every order. With over 15,000 recipes to choose from each week, many ready in just 15 minutes or less, it's so perfect for those nights when you have no energy left. What I love most is their smart cart technology. It actually learns what I like and what I will actually cook. So no more buying ingredients for recipes that I'll never make. Everything that shows up, I actually use. They screen out over 200 additives, including high fructose corn syrup and artificial sweeteners, only high quality meat and seafood with no hormones or antibiotics, and they carry brands like Vital Farms and Ithaca Hummus that I already trust. The time I've gotten back has been incredible. Instead of spending Sunday meal planning, I'm doing things that actually matter to me. Take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box, plus get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/mindlove and use code mindlove. That's hungryroot.com/mindlove, code mindlove, to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/mindlove, code mindlove.
Did I put the clothes in the dryer? I hope they don't think I was serious.
I need to be
about
awake
this
in
joke.
3
I've got my
hours.
brain shut
Just
off.
sleep already.
When your racing thoughts keep you up at night, it's tough to let go and get the rest you need. Better sleep can help. You might have heard of white or brown noise. There's a whole rainbow of color noises, and they can help you calm your mind, reduce stress, and sleep better, like the green noise you're listening to now. With the Better Sleep app, you can discover more color noises and over 200 soothing sounds, guided meditations, and bedtime stories. High-quality rest is vital to your mental well-being and physical health. Calm your restless mind, conquer your day, and sleep better at night. Download Better Sleep from the App Store or Google Play and start a 7-day trial today. Because when you sleep better, you feel better.
And now let's welcome Alex Elle to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, what inspired your recent work on how we heal?
Oh, that's a good question. I really wanted this book to be a reflection of like community, a reflection of the multifacets that happen with healing. And and so there's a little bit of everything in this book. There's my personal experience, there are rather my teachings, and also I interviewed some really awesome women about their healing process. So intermixed is kind of like I don't know, it's like a mishmash of stories and reflections, but also meditations and journaling prompts. And I just wanted folks to realize that healing looks so different for everyone and that it doesn't have to look one way. And so there's a lot of that in how we heal.
Tell us about the self-doubt that you experienced while writing this book, because that was something I could totally relate to. I was reading it and I was thinking, oh my gosh, I feel like she's in my brain. And it felt like validation for me, because sometimes that self-doubt does have the power to talk me out of things, or I guess I should say I give it that power. And I think that there's truth in that maybe I don't deserve to write this, or who am I to create this, or who am I to guide people through this when my life has been such a mess. So what was your experience with that?
I feel like what I'm learning on my journey is that self-doubt is a teacher, and it often invites me to remember what is true. That's a really hard thing to do when you're in the thick of it, right? What really shifts us towards our best self is like looking at the self-doubt and saying, okay, what are you doing here? What are you trying to teach me? And what do I know to be true? And I have 3 children. I have a husband. We was writing this book in the thick of the pandemic, a family of 5, home, trying to write, trying to homeschool, trying to just breathe. It was so hard to even have 5 seconds to create a clear mind. And so what I had to realize is that, okay, the type of space that I'm in right now is only feeding my self-doubt, because not only can I literally not do this thing because we have crying toddlers and a frustrated teenager or whatever, I also feel like, wow, this is never going to get done. And who am I to even write this book? And so on top of everything, it was just chaos. And so I decided to open up how we heal, sharing that story, because I know I'm not the only one. I know I'm not the only parent who's gone through this. I know I'm not the only author, woman, mother, friend. And so humanizing our healing and humanizing our self-doubt is major for me, because then it opens up this can of vulnerability and accessibility and relatability, which I think is really important and goes hand in hand with my work as far as bringing community together, because I am a big believer that when we share our stories, even the rough and the nitty and the gritty, it brings us closer to one another. And so, I look at my self-doubt as a teacher. I don't love it, but it's a part of the human experience for me and for everyone, I think.
I have noticed this shift in my interviews lately, how many people are coming back to the idea of community, or just that ends up being such this resonating key point in what they're learning. And I have this belief that if you are in tune with the collective, if you allow yourself to open up to that, then that's why it starts to become a theme. And I'm like, why is everyone talking about the same thing? And it's funny because I was just working on an interview with Dan Siegel and his new book called Interconnected. And he talks about how our society and our brains and our wiring have all been guiding us, or basically steering us towards this illusion of self, that self is isolated. And when that happens in the body, for example, when one cell starts to work as its own entity rather than as part of the collective, we call that cancer. And so it's interesting when we think of healing and we think of our own journeys, because you make that point quite a bit, that like healing isn't just about this solitary act. You say that healing our hearts is communal. What have you been finding with that communal aspect of healing? How does it does it affect the whole, or is it affected by the whole, or both? What have you uncovered there?
So I've been centering community care in my work for 10 years since I started. And I think that self-care is an act of community care. I think that when we heal ourselves, we heal each other. I mean, I open up how we heal with that. And healing is an act of community service in my mind. And so I do think it is this experience where we are not only healing ourselves, but we're healing our lineage, both forward and backward. We are leading by example, healing by example. And what is really beautiful to me about that is remembering and trusting that my healing isn't just for me. It's also for my daughters. It's also for my students and my clients. It's also for my marriage, right? And so it's like when we look at it on a micro level, it invites us to see that this is not just about us. I mean, many folks have trauma in their DNA. There has been a lot of research on that, especially Black folks, and I am a Black woman. And so something I've been talking about, especially when I was on tour and when I've been teaching, is if there is trauma in our DNA, there can also be joy. There can also be healing. So reframing things on a cellular level is magnificent, and it's possible. And I do think that has a lot to do with how we allow community to hold us and how we also show up in the world. Even if we're not best friends with someone or coworkers with someone, perhaps it's just in passing. Like I love when a stranger smiles at me when I'm on my morning walks and we exchange that sense of, I see you. And so healing for me is this permission slip to be seen and also to see other people, because the healed parts of me can now realize and look at and hold compassion for the unhealed parts of someone else. And I think that that too is collective care and communal care.
That's so true, because in my most unhealed periods of life, I also placed the most blame. I was the most judgmental. And it's because I was projecting all of my own issues onto other people. Those were the things that were highlighted, and it was easier to see them in somebody else than it was to see them in myself. When I was dating people, it was easier to fix them and say what they needed to work on than see my own flaws and what I was ignoring and still needed to work through. And it's interesting because I've gone through these sort of oscillations of understanding and seeing even the healing work that my family or my ancestors have done. My family is my mom's side and my dad's side. They were divorced pretty much my whole life, so they just seem like very clear different sides of family. And one of them hasn't gone through much at all. And they also tend to focus on all of the little things. These make them big problems, really. And the other side has gone through great trauma. That's where my ancestral trauma comes from. I've shared with my audience before that my dad had it really hard. He was the oldest of 8 kids, and his dad killed his mom and committed suicide and blamed my dad because my dad was the one trying to fight back and protect the family. And so my dad had that to carry. And I was raised in a religious home, and I don't really identify with the religion anymore. There's things that I gained from it. There's also things that I felt like maybe it hindered. I don't know. Everything happens as it should, though. And for a long time, I sort of felt like I was the only person that was trying. And I really resonated with how you talked about it was lonely to be the only matriarch of healing for your lineage. But the more I set off on this healing path, the more that's opening up to me, where I can actually see, my dad started it in a different way than I did. He was sober pretty much my whole life, and now I have stopped drinking as of like 500 days ago or something like that. But he did what he could, and he found religion to save himself, whereas I kind of identify more with a broader spiritual journey. And so it's interesting how, if you would have asked me 7 years ago, I would have been like, no, I'm the only one doing this. And now I'm like, no, people have found their ways. They've just found different ways than I have. if you would have asked me 7 years ago, I would have been like, no, I'm the only one doing this. And now I'm like, no, people have found their ways. They've just found different ways than I have.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that distinction. Like, people have found their different ways of showing up and in their healing, right? And I think that's really where I've learned to exercise more empathy and compassion when it comes to my mother. I'm completely disconnected from my biological father's side of the family. I don't know much about them. But when it comes to my mom, it's interesting. Like, when I started looking at her as a woman and not just my mother, the empathy and compassion really started to open up for me. And then I could see, like, yeah, I may be the only one healing this way, but I'm sure that in some phase of my mother's life, she thought that what she was doing would be healing for the moment, right? So it's like looking at how people show up and how they try to show up, even if it's not the same way that we would show up.
And I can relate to the mother-daughter triggers just so much. Like, my mom and I have a great relationship, but she's also my, as Rhonda Byrne puts it, personal emotional trainer. She can trigger me more than anybody in this world. And there'll be times where I'm like deep into my healing work, just doing the work, and I see the way I'm showing up in my family with my husband and my kid or with my friends. And then I go home for the weekend and I feel like I've just reverted back to like teenage angst. I'm like, am I making no progress at all?
Right.
And it's funny. I think it might have been Ram Dass. I don't know, maybe not. But somebody said, if you think you're enlightened, spend a weekend with your family. And I was like, thank you. I feel so seen. You wrote this so long ago. But
Yes.
It brings up the point that you teach about how some things will always need tending to in our healing, even if we thought we were further along in the process. Can you talk about that?
So I wrote something last year that said, give yourself permission to heal from the same thing more than once. And the reason why I wrote that is because society teaches us to move on, to get over it, to go on to the next thing. And something that I realized in this healing journey in particular is that certain things are always going to hurt. And an example of that could be like the loss of a loved one. My mother-in-law, not my mom. My mother-in-law died 6 years ago. And my husband said to me, this is never going to not hurt. It's all about how I deal with the hurt when it shows up, the tenderness, the aching. And I just remember thinking that, like, aching, the self-soothing, that is what's so beautiful about the healing process, because it's not about moving on or getting over. It's about being with everything that shows up as we are healing, as we are mending, as we are experiencing joy in the midst of grief or gratitude in the midst of grief, right? So I often say to folks, listen, it is absolutely okay that you are still triggered by something you thought you healed from, because at the end of the day, there's no destination when it comes to healing. It's a work in progress. It's a forever love. And that's special. Even though it's annoying, it's special.
I'm tearing up over here because I have those things, and a lot of them actually, and they're at different stages of that. And so they show up in totally different ways. The one that still gets me to cry, I hate that it sounds silly, but people with dogs know. I lost my dog of 15 years in May, and
I'm sorry.
oh, it was just such a deep loss for me. Like, he was just my family during my hardest times, and I feel it in my body whenever it comes up, and I'm also pregnant, so the tears come a lot faster. I'm okay over here. But yeah, it's funny because I loved that dog so much. Like, we were so close. People were really worried about me when he passed, because they were just like, oh my gosh, we've known you with him. We haven't known you without him, type thing. And what I found so surprising, though, was that one of the biggest things that came up was this almost regret, or
Mm.
I was beating myself up because when I first got him in my 20s, that was when my life was the biggest shit show. And so it's part of why our bond was so strong, was because
Mm.
I was I felt broken, and I that was when I was discovering that I could find a healing journey, and that I was still spiraling part of the time, and then I was sort of trying to climb out. I was just making a lot of mistakes. And so I could not show up for myself properly, let alone for something else. And I really have said so many times that Maverick saved my life on a number of occasions. Just having something else to care for, like, gave me a reason to get up. And it's like the moment he died, I was crushed with this guilt of, why couldn't I be for him what he was for me in the beginning? And for some reason, it's like my mind wouldn't let me see that I eventually became those things because of what he showed me. I feel like I'm
Mm.
like overly emotional right now about it, but you
No.
just feel like a safe space. And so anyways, it's just, it's funny how those regrets or the guilt, or it's really the insight of where I need to forgive myself. And those things have come
Mm.
up so often. Another example that just recently came up, and I had like this enlightening moment, was I had this whole, like, the basically my deepest rock bottom with this guy that I was dating that turned out to be a horrible person, that nearly he ended up being a secret criminal and nearly ruined my life, all this stuff. And he also gave me a book in the beginning, The Mastery of Love by Don Miguel Ruiz. And it was so
Mhm.
odd knowing him as long as I did. That was the only thing of that kind that he gave to me. Like, he wasn't that kind of person. I don't even know if he read it. I feel like it might have been part of his like facade that he put on. But I had this moment the other day where I was like listening to my own story, and it was bringing up these feelings. And I'm like, okay, I'm used to telling my story, but sometimes when I hear it, it'll hit me differently. And it's like, that poor girl, what she went through. And then I realized that he was the one who gave me that book because somebody asked me about it. And I had this aha moment of like, how sometimes you look at your story and you're like, okay, yes, I've trained myself to see that it's happened for a reason. But I can still get into the mindset, depending on my mood, of like, wasn't there an easier way? Like, really, you had to do
Mm.
all that? How much time did I waste while my other friends were, saving for a house or something like that? And I'm doing all this catch up. And so it was just this moment where I just felt this message that, like, that book was the seed planted, where God, the universe, was showing me, like, that did happen for a reason. It happened exactly as it should, because that book was one of the biggest stepping stones to even realizing that healing myself was possible, that I wasn't
Mm.
just at mercy of what could happen. And so I know that self forgiveness is such a big part of your message. How do you approach it? And I think what was hard for me is even uncovering the parts that I needed to forgive. Like, I didn't even know I was harboring this self resentment. So, what's your process for that?
Ooh, self-forgiveness is a daily practice. And something that I say in How We Heal is self-hatred isn't fertile ground for our healing. And so when I think about self-forgiveness, I think about grace and possibility of healing and compassion. I think about how I would show up for my kids if they made a mistake, when they make mistakes. I love them through it. You know what I mean? And it's like, how do we as adults love ourselves through the crazy shit we've done, the things we've been through, the places we've been that may not have been in alignment with what we said we wanted? Like, how do we soften with ourselves? And so for me, that started in therapy when I was in my 20s, like being kind to myself by writing love notes to myself. And I thought it was so dumb when my therapist first told me, like, why don't you write some love notes to yourself? And I'm like, why would I do that? But that really changed my life. Being kind to myself, especially when I dropped the ball, especially when no one else around me was being kind. Like, how do I hold and love myself through this thing? And so it's a little bit deeper to me than I forgive myself for, but more so like, How are my actions leading with grace and forgiveness? And some days that's really hard, especially in motherhood, but also it teaches me so much about how to see myself and how to see others. And that's been really beautiful for me on this journey of healing and evolution. It's like, how can you be soft with yourself? This world can be a hard place for folks, for all folks from all walks of life, right? How do we soften into ourselves? How do we become a safe space for ourselves? And I think I'm just now in my 30s, like learning how to be softer with myself.
It's difficult. Can you give us an example of what that might look like in practice?
Yeah. So a couple of months ago, I mentioned I have 3 kids. One just turned 15 yesterday, 11/20. She turned 15. I don't know when this will air, so I'll just say one just turned 15. One is 4, and the other is 3. And my oldest is a amazing kid. She's so awesome. And I said something or did something or didn't say or didn't do something that hurt her feelings. I don't remember what happened, but her feelings were hurt. And she told me that I was being insensitive and that I hurt her feelings. And immediately I apologized to her. Not I'm sorry or I'm sorry but I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings. What can I do better next time? How can I love you better next time? And it was easy for me to apologize. Like, I didn't grow up with adults apologizing to me, but I knew that a part of breaking cycles in my life was that I was going to be apologizing to my kids if I did something that hurt them. We talked through it and we hugged and kissed after. And I have been mindful of what I say or what I don't say, how I say something, etc. But I remember after leaving her room feeling like such a complete failure for hurting her feelings. And I felt like I let her down, like I was traumatizing her. I just went down a whole spiral. So and it was intense. And so I had to ask myself, how can I love you through this? And what can we do better next time? And that was the same thing I asked my kid is something I asked myself. And I had to be honest with myself and say, you are just a human. You are an amazing mother. You are a kind, empathetic mother. Sometimes we don't have the best days. And you are open to fixing your behavior and your mistakes with your kids. Forgive yourself for being insensitive. And it was in that moment where I had to talk to my husband and he was like, "Look, it's all right. We all have bad days." Charlie, my oldest, she was like, "Mom, I love you. It's okay. We all have bad days. I can be insensitive sometimes. We laugh about it and stuff, but it's just like showing our children that we're human and that we also deeply love them even when we are wrong or when we drop the ball is magnificent, but we also have to not beat ourselves up over getting it wrong, especially as we raise humans, because it's hard. And so a big part of my healing work has been to give myself grace, not just in motherhood, but in life, and also love myself how I love other people, which can be deeply challenging when you are the matriarch of healing and you've never seen love or you've never had an apology from an adult. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you don't know what you're doing, it is hard. And we are all learning along the way. And it's like, okay, how do we improve? And then how do we not hate ourselves through the mistake that we made? How do we instead fix our behavior and love ourselves through it?
That's such a relatable example and something that's been on my mind a lot. I'm pregnant with my second. My first will be exactly 2 when this one comes,
Mm,
and so I still have a little bit of time before I have those deeper conversations, but the type of person I am, I'm already thinking about it. Like, how am I
mm-hmm.
going to handle this? How am I going to make sure that he is okay with his emotions, that he welcomes them? How am I going to make sure that I'm modeling what goodness is, what all of these
Mm,
concepts are that we're talking about? How do I model those? And man, if anything, it's a kick in the butt for my own healing. Like, I
yeah.
immediately have a mirror towards what I have been neglecting, even with all of my years of healing work. And so, one of the things that uh, comes up though with the example that you gave, and I feel like with kids, it's a little different. I will apologize to my kids if I ever hurt their feelings, no matter what, even if I'm looking and I'm like, really, that hurt your feelings? But I feel like it's a collective conversation that keeps coming up even in society. It's like people are talking about, well, should everything be apologized for every time somebody's offended, or where's the line of seeing of also teaching people to not let that penetrate in a way. And like I said, it's totally different when it comes from your parents. I feel like it's always
Mm-hmm.
a separate conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But what is that? What do you think about that topic? Because it is a kind of a push and pull. Like, no, everyone's too offended these days. Everyone expects an apology for everything, and then on the other
Mm.
side, it's like, yeah, but we can do better, can't we? Look at the the effects of our actions, like, and there is a
Right.
line there. I can get into the mindset of both sides depending on the topic. What
Mm.
are your thoughts on that?
I think there's nothing wrong with apologizing if you hurt someone. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And when and specifically thinking of parenthood, it's the acknowledgement of the hurt feeling, of the way you made someone else feel, your child in this case, that I think is what creates emotional safety, is what makes children see and trust and believe that they matter and that their feelings matter. And while they'll go out into the world and people will be like, I'm not apologizing to you for that, they, I think, will have less of a hard time when that happens because they know themselves in a way that, because they were seen as children. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I know for me personally, I never had adults apologizing to me. And I grew up in a very volatile, very abusive home. And that is something for me that, one, I do not want to, of course, I'm not volatile or abusive to my children, but if they say that, hey, that hurt my feelings, that is like, that's emotional safety when a child can say to their parents, you hurt my feelings. And for us not to dismiss it and be like, ugh, that, and that can, that, and don't get me wrong, sometimes you want to say that, especially in teenagehood, but, or, and saying, I'm sorry I made you feel that way is so important. It's important to me. It's really hard to put into words. It's about the acknowledgement. It's about the creating of emotional safety. And even when I look at my 4.5-year-old and my 3-year-old, they're 20 months apart. It's pure chaos in this house with them. And they can be really rough and tumble and all of that. And that they can hurt each other. They can hurt each other's feelings. But it's second nature for them to say, I'm sorry. Because they hear us saying that to each other. And it's not like we're not just teaching them to say, I'm sorry. We're also teaching them to change the behavior. Right. So it's like, I think it's cyclical. And I also understand where people are coming from, where it's like people are too sensitive these days. But I don't think sensitivity is a bad thing. I think that if you hurt someone, whether it was your intention or not, an apology is important. It creates emotional safety. It creates empathy. It creates connection. It is communal care. And that's the best way that I can put it. And my oldest is so in tune with her feelings and her emotions. Like even with her friends, when they have falling out or whatever, she leads with such maturity and boundaries and kindness. And I truly believe it's because we create safety in our home with how to interact with people, with how to change your behavior, with how to, if you hurt someone, with not just saying I'm sorry, but demonstrating. Like it's important. It creates better human beings. I really believe that. you know, Less, passive aggressiveness, less judgmentalness. It's more like human to human. And humans are messy. And sometimes shit is like, damn, you're mad about that. But like we have to acknowledge that people will feel how they feel. And if we love and value someone and their feelings, there is nothing wrong with an apology.
Yeah, I totally followed that. And I had like mini epiphanies as you were speaking, like the collective masterminds of both of our wisdom coming together. And one of the things that came up for me is I think the biggest piece that you said that I'm like, yes, is the acknowledgement, because that's something you learn when you're raising kids. I've read a bunch of parenting books at this point, and it's interesting dealing with a toddler because you can't just sit them down and logic with them,
Right.
And
There's
so
no logic with a toddler.
yeah. And so you have to acknowledge their feelings. And most of their feelings by an adult standard are going to be ridiculous. It's like, okay, like you asked for a piece of cheese, then you threw the piece of cheese on the floor and now you're upset. Like what? And so it's like these little things, but it teaches me so much because whereas my first thought was, yes, I would handle it differently with my own kids. What I feel like is expected from me and in managing their feelings is different from a friend or somebody else or a stranger online. But then the more I sat with it and listened to you speak, I thought about the idea that no, everybody, first of all, needs their feelings acknowledged. And I think that is one of the big step that gets missed. If somebody sits there and they're like, well, like I understand the concept of like, okay, if I said something to somebody and I meant no harm by it and it touched a wound of theirs that I did not know existed, and then they're upset, is that my fault? No, it's not really my fault. But my choice to be a friend to that person or to be somebody, even if it's not a friend, it's somebody that I just come in contact with. My choice, it's how do I want to be in this world? Well, I want to be somebody that leaves somebody feeling better than when I first got there. And if that's what I'm trying to create, then that requires something different than saying, well, no, this is your problem and not mine. And I had a friend once and that I remember it was during a really lonely period of my life. Like I had to be out and about. If I was at home, it was like my trauma would build up and I just didn't know how to be alone with my thoughts. And I felt left out with something, sent a message about it, explaining this. And she just responded with I can't be responsible for your emotions around this, something like that. And I remember at the time it felt like a knife to the chest. But like a few years later, we ended up getting together for dinner and I ended up thanking her for that moment because I sat with it for a very long time. And I was like, you're right. You weren't responsible for that. And I do see how I was overreacting. But now that years have passed, even that, now that I've gone through my own journey, do I think that was the easiest way I could have learned? Not saying it was her responsibility to teach me that, but like it didn't feel good at the time. I felt worse at the time. Like there are different ways to say, like, to approach people with that. And I think one of the best ways for me in the way of how I feel seen, if say this were happening between me and my husband and he hurt my feelings without meaning to, or vice versa, curiosity even. Like,
yes.
Like if I don't understand why I hurt somebody, there's a lot to be said about actually asking, what was it about that? What wound did that open up for you? I mean, however you want to voice this, but then it's a conversation. And together, just like I said, with the collective masterminding of our wisdom, different things come up. A lot of times we both don't have the answers. I feel triggered by something and I don't even realize why I'm triggered by it. I've got to go layers deep. And somebody being willing to create that space for me and saying like, Well, what was it about that? That can help me unravel things that need healing. That can actually, rather than leaving me alone in even more despair, and it takes 3 years for me to come to this conclusion of thank you for doing that for me. Instead, it's like being this space right there. That's who I want to be for people.
I love that. But I think that also comes with the healing that we've done, the place that we are on our path. Something I tell my clients and students all the time is like, just because we're on this path in our healing doesn't mean someone else is, like, and that's okay. Sometimes we are much further and further doesn't mean better. Let me just clarify. But sometimes we are much further than someone else might be, and vice versa. I know that when I was in the beginning stages of my healing, there was some things that I am not proud of. The things that I didn't handle well, the conversations that I didn't have, the lack of self-awareness enough to be curious about someone else, right? And so I think it's all a learning. It's all a learning phase and process, and holding the care, the community care for each other is so valuable, deeply valuable. But I do think that requires self-awareness. That requires getting curious, even if we're annoyed. Like I'm a married person, I have a husband, and there's some times where it's like, oh my gosh, like, are we reading the same book, Like, but it's
How
like,
hard is it to hang
how
the
hard is
towel over
this?
the right bar?
Listen. So let's get down to why this is challenging for you.
Yeah.
But like, just holding things, like, we're being funny right now, but like truly holding things with love. I think that's what it comes down to. Holding things with love and curiosity and understanding, compassion. Like, there's not a lot of people who are taught to do that. We are learning as we go, you know? And so, we'll have to learn the hard way more times than not. But I think we're getting there. I think we're all getting closer a
Yeah.
little.
That's what I think is so beautiful about intimate relationships. Yes, they can trigger you a whole lot, and all the little things come up, but like I said earlier with children, it's another version of a mirror that shows us. And depending on the type of partnership you have, if the person's on the same healing journey, that can go even faster because yeah, imagine a couple who's always willing to like be curious about each other's triggers rather than, oh, you're bringing this up again, you're nagging me about this again.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, you create space together to be able to allow those things to arise. Because one of the other things that you teach is realizing and naming your needs. And I shared how I didn't even understand my needs. I had triggers, but I didn't know where they were coming from. I thought my trigger was somebody not texting me back. I didn't know that my trigger was actually feeling alone. Like it's just going layers deeper, or feeling like I was on a path by myself so often, not feeling seen. And so it might sound the same, not texting back, not being seen, but they're two very different things. One's this surface level sort of material manifestation of it. The other thing is like this deeper wound. And so if we're always just focusing on the trigger, then we only see those surface level things and we don't get to the root cause. It's like taking an Advil when we have a consistent headache and not saying like, why have I had a headache for 3 years? Like maybe there's something else that I can do.
Yeah.
And so that for me has that willingness to hold that space for other people has come from understanding that I don't always know why I'm triggered, that I don't always know my needs until I have that space or this specific situation comes up and it uncovers for me or whatever it is. And so it makes me more patient with other people when I'm like, do you even know what you're talking about? You're just lashing out at me. You know what I mean? And so why do you think that it's so difficult to not just name our needs? Because that's a whole thing about enforcing boundaries that we could probably talk about forever also. But sometimes we can't even really see them enough to name them effectively. Why do you think that it's so difficult to not just name our needs? Because that's a whole thing about enforcing boundaries that we could probably talk about forever also. But sometimes we can't even really see them enough to name them effectively.
You know what? I love what you just said about willingness. Like, that's such a strong word. That actually gave me chills, like the willingness. And I think when we're in relationships that leave us feeling seen, safe, and supported, there's a different type of willingness that we have to name our needs. Or maybe it's not the naming of the need, but the exploring of the needs and the wants so that we can figure out how we want to be in relationship with other people. So that word willingness, and it just feels deliberate. It feels deliberate and it feels on purpose, and it opens up possibility. So when it comes to naming needs, for me, it's not necessarily about boundaries all the time. Like, a lot of times it's about self-advocacy and literally saying, like, this is what I need from you, or this is what I want from you. And having those conversations that can be really challenging, but also really nourishing. And I do think that we have to have some sort of emotional safety to do that, like feel safe to be able to show up with our needs in tow or with our wants in tow.
And I'm having more aha moments just around, I agree completely around the feeling safe, because I think one of the reasons that it's taken me so long to feel safe in expressing my needs, vocalizing them, has been because I've been afraid, like, well, will this be too much for you and you'll leave? Because I've always been just sort of felt solo my whole life. Only child, moving a lot, switching schools. I don't know, didn't do well in group projects, just all the things. It was like me being my little free bird on my own. And there were things that I used to be really proud of about that. And it's like the older I get and the more that I realize just the collective nature of life, and I think health, really, how we sort of touched on earlier around how our minds and our wiring sort of sets us off, that we're these little individual entities, but we are so much more a part of the collective than we think. And that collective's supposed to be there. That's why it's harder to heal, I think, on my own, because I don't have those mirrors, and I don't, if I'm living in an apartment by myself for years, yeah, I can think I'm enlightened, but then I go spend time with somebody and that's when a trigger comes. It's really easy not to be triggered if you're the only one there, And
Correct.
So
Correct.
in all of these ways, the community is what sort of moves us forward. And I'm, as the years go on, the older I get, the more I just see that is what life is supposed to be. And so with expressing my needs, one of the things that's coming up recently is I'm 6 months pregnant, and my husband and I are both entrepreneurs. We both work from home. It can get kind of chaotic. There's a toddler here. We're like, who needs to take him for this? What, I am getting to the stage where I'm needing a lot more rest, but I don't identify with that. I see myself in this other way. So that rest period is difficult for me. I feel like, even though this isn't even the reality of the situation, when I'm laying down on the couch and he comes down at like 2:30 p.m., in my mind, I create this whole story about how he's looking at me not being productive, especially if we have childcare, like, we're paying for you to lay down, stuff like that. And then I'll talk to him about it, and he's like, I wasn't thinking that at all. I don't know where that came from. And I'm like, oh, I'm clearly projecting what I'm thinking, And,
Yeah.
And so that has been the hardest thing to voice lately, is just my need for resting. But it always has been. And you have this whole section in your book that I was like, yes, because it's not just pregnancy that calls in the rest. It's part of the healing journey in general. It's that period where we sit back and we've done all this work, and that part can be addictive, where we just feel like, okay, next book. But what we forget, and what I forgot probably the first 7 years of self-development, was that I need time to let each of these things integrate. Because if I move on to the next thing too quickly, then I've forgotten the first thing. Like maybe little tidbits will stay with me, but it's not the same as like actually sitting back and being like, okay, who am I now? And taking notice of those things. And that's one of the things I always try to do, like even just after a meditation. If I just meditate, get up and go, it's harder to come back to it for me because it's just something that happened versus meditating and sitting there and being like, how do I feel right now? How is it different than when I got here? Like, what is my inner peace like? What wisdom is coming to me? And when I spend time doing that, then the next time it's like, oh, remember that bliss right afterwards? And the same thing happens in all of my healing. It's like, yeah, remember this deep work feels hard and I want to run from it. But remember how blissful I felt afterwards? Do you remember how many things I noticed that change in my life afterwards? But we have to create the space to actually notice those things in order to understand what's happening within us, or even to allow those happenings to occur, if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. I love how you say allow it to occur. Like that's important. Being able to sit with the stuff, being able to be present, choosing presence, sitting with it, not rushing through it. Emotional rest is important. Slowing down is important. I mean, we live in a super fast-paced world. I was recently thinking about this because I was on a 7-city book tour for How We Heal. 10 days, 7 cities. Wow. And I kept having to say to myself, be here now. Don't think about the next flight. Don't think about the next show. Just be here. And it was so hard to be deliberate about being present, about choosing presence. And what I realize is that I need to get better, not need, I deeply want to get better at being with what is in front of me when it comes to everything. Savoring a piece of cake, holding my children's hand, laughing with my husband, going for my morning walks. Like, how do I be with what's right here, right now? Because so often we're not. We're on to the next thing. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been working for myself for 10 years. And I look up sometimes and I'm like, damn, it has been 10 years. How? I feel like I've done so much, but I've missed so much. And so getting intentional about being with what is here and now, I think is huge, especially when it comes to our healing. And the reason why I think that is because healing is not just about the mending of a wound or the repairing of something that's been broken. It's also about being with the joy that comes up. And so if we are so busy moving through our healing that we forget to be with the joy, are we really healing? And that's something I've had to ask myself. If you're just rushing through this thing without savoring, without greeting the joy that's at your door, even if you may be in grief, are you really giving yourself permission to heal? Because I think joy is a part of our healing process. It should be a part of our healing practice. But we have to slow down and choose presence in order to see it. And that is a work in progress for me.
Ooh, I love that. And it brings up one of the things that used to come up for me was I would oscillate between growth and setbacks. And it was like, you actually had a quote in your book that just resonated so completely. You said something around, you kept trying to fix yourself in the same environments that broke you down and left you distracted from doing the healing work. And so I was in that same period in my 20s where I would just get on these fixes. I was doing yoga and I would read all these books but I wasn't surrounded by anybody that was doing the same thing. And so it was very easily for me to just like backslide. And so then as I ended up slowly making changes to my life, one person at a time, sort of attracting somebody new, not even really noticing that my life was shifting, even doing the work in the harder ways and not really seeing where I was I was setting myself back. But I was worried that if I wasn't constantly on that fast track of progress, that I was then going to spiral back, because that's what had happened for the first few years. What I didn't see was basically what you had voiced so well about being in the environment that broke you down. I was still in that. And I didn't really see when I had started to move out of that. But because of that, I had this fear where I was having a hard time discerning between what was a rest period, an integration period, and seeing that as just a time that I was not making progress. And I had planned to ask you, like, well, how do you know which one you're choosing? If you're choosing to sort of cease the progress, or if you're choosing to rest and integrate. And I think you answered it, and it's in the presence. Because I think even if we choose, again, that willingness word, to be in the present moment, whether it hurts, whether it's joy, that in itself is going to make progress, whether we're realizing it or not. I'm not saying that progress is the end all be all. I think being really is, and learning to be in that state of peace. But if we're in that present moment, we not only are able to see more of, we talked about so many different things, but one of the things was like triggers that come up, and thinking it's the surface level thing versus, oh, it's actually a wound that's a few layers under that. Or whether it's the self-forgiveness, just feeling uncomfortable in the moment and then realizing, oh no, this is kind of a resentment that I'm holding on to myself. All of those things are found in the present moment. And what we tend to do is we create all these stories about ourselves and other people. And then we're either living in the past or in the future, or just in the story that we made up, and it's an illusion completely. And so it helps us to see parts of ourselves that are just covered up, or we've been hiding, or we have been ashamed to kind of pull out. But it also helps us to see what comes up for other people. I find that the more present I am, it's like I can be having a conversation with somebody and pick up on the tiniest subtleties, where I'm like, ooh, I want to pause here. I could see that twitch in the face, or I felt the quiver in the voice, and so subtle that most people wouldn't notice it, but I can see it. And in my mind, usually I'm like, oh, that's why I'm here. Like, I need to hold space for that, or I want to hold space for that. I'm willing to hold space for that. And it reminds me of this story. It's kind of the last thing I want to unravel, but I thought there were so many lessons in it. You told this story about the mean lady and trying to get her to speak to you. Will you share that story? Because there's so many lessons in it that I feel like we can unravel.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So we used to live in an apartment years ago, and we had a neighbor who everyone looked at her like the mean lady, because she wasn't very nice and she looked mean, is the best way to put it. And I don't want to say I would go out of my way to be kind to her, but I would be a little bit more intentional about like holding the elevator for her, or smiling at her, or saying hello. And like 9 times out of 10, she would look at me like she couldn't stand me, that I was so annoying. And like, why does she hold the elevator open for me? Go up to the 3rd floor, and like, I don't want to talk to you. Like, close the door. But then one day, well, my husband had said, stop talking to her. She doesn't want you to talk to her. She's mean. Stop talking to her. And I just said, no. I said, one day she is going to speak to me. So then it became kind of a game, like a game of compassion. I don't know if that counts. I don't know if Thich Nhat Hanh will be happy about me saying that, but I just really knew that she was hurting, because I knew that look. I could feel it in my body, because I used to have that look. And I used to think, like, what did she go through? She would be with her daughter a lot of the time, and her daughter was the sweetest, most kind little girl, but she was always clinging to her mom. And I remember thinking, like, what is she protecting her mama from? Like, what is their story? And so I continued to be kind. I stopped saying hello, but I did like smile. I did still hold the elevator open. And then one day I smiled at her, and she smiled back at me. And I thought I was going to die. I was like, you would have thought Beyonce smiled at me or something. I was like, oh my, in my mind, I'm just like, oh my God, she smiled at me. And then I think I said, like, it's a nice day outside or something. Or maybe she said it. I don't know. But we were like having a moment. And I was just feeling good and happy for her. Like something shifted. What good news did she get? Like, I don't know this woman. I don't know her story, nothing, but I was just thrilled that she had a glimpse of joy that she was willing to share with me. I ran home and I was like, babe, she smiled at me. The lady, she smiled at me, and he was like, are you serious? Like, it was a whole thing because like no one could get her to be smiley or say hello or anything. And so we had a moment, and I shared that. So my editor actually wanted to take that whole section out of How We Heal. I don't know why, but she was like, it doesn't fit. And I was like, oh, no, this fits because this is community care right here. Like allowing someone to feel held and seen, even if it's just through a smile. And like she felt safe enough for whatever reason that day. And she wanted to be seen by me for whatever reason that day because she had something, there was something that had softened in her. And I remember thinking, like, I remember when that happened for me, when I softened, when I stopped being so angry, even if it was just for that elevator ride, you know? And it just reminded me of the power of collective care and compassion and humanity. And it's so funny. I actually recently saw her and we didn't speak, but she saw me and I saw her. And it was this very clear, I hadn't seen her in years since this happened. And we didn't smile or anything, but we saw each other. And it was that I know who you are type of vibe. And I just think that that's beautiful. I think we were both kind of shocked to see each other because it had been so long, but it was kind of like we were having a moment where it was like, oh my gosh, like she was probably like, there's my annoying neighbor from the third floor from all those years ago. And I was like, oh, I don't even call her the mean lady anymore. I was like, there's the lady who finally smiled at me. So I just thought that was a lighthearted way, but also a really impactful way to share communal care.
Yeah.
And yeah, so yeah, that was in a nutshell, that's the story.
See, I got so many things from that, and two of the biggest things that came up, it reminds me of different things I've done in the past. But the biggest thing was meeting people where they are.
That
Because there's been times in whether it's intimate relationship, friendship, whatever, where I'm like, I'm doing all these things for you, what do you do for me? Type thing. And then I get a shift of perspective and I'm like, oh, we have different love languages. I do gifts or something like that for you. You do quality time. I'm not as good at that one. And with this former mean lady, now just lady, maybe she wasn't ready for the conversation. She didn't want to open herself up to having to do that often, but she could handle the smile. Or maybe the smile showed that she was in the presence of peace or a safe space or something like that. And that's what allowed her to come out. And so there's so many different things in that. And we had talked about earlier how just because we're further in certain areas does not mean we're better. And that's so true. And it's something that I feel like the further in self-development you get, the more you have to remind yourself, because you start looking at your family. Why am I the only one doing this work? You guys aren't helping, or you get in an argument with a friend who doesn't have any of the tools, and you're like, this wouldn't even be an argument if you did any sort of work on yourself, And so,
right.
And we tend to like project these things, and it's like, well, there wouldn't be work for me to do if everyone was doing the exact same thing, Like, thank you, universe, for giving me these people, for putting me in this situation where I'm better able to see parts of myself that still need attention, love, and care. And so in that moment with the lady, it's that presence. It's the willingness to be in the moment that maybe you didn't even know what you were going to do at that moment. Maybe you didn't know you were going to smile anymore, but it happened because you were present enough that that's what you felt called to do. And so I just felt like it was such a great story to end on.
Thank you, because that story almost didn't make the book, but I'm so glad it made the book.
You can send your editor this clip. See? Well, Thank you for this conversation. I absolutely loved it. This is just going to be one of my favorite episodes. And so, for listeners that are resonating with you as much as I am and want to learn more, where's the best place that they can connect with you and find your book?
Oh, yeah. So alexelle.com, all the things are there. I have a gratitude newsletter on Substack, alexelle.substack.com. And of course, I'm on Instagram. I'm just at ALEX on Instagram. Don't ask me how I got it. I got it. I'm at Alex. People are always like, how did you get that? Magic. And yes, I look forward to being in community with you all. And thank you so much for having me, Melissa. This was really great and fun. And I'm honored that you invited me on.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/283. Your challenge for this week is to just journal. I found that that's one of the best ways to get in touch with myself, whether it's a new perspective on what I'm going through or new ideas for my higher self on how to heal those things. I was reading something recently about how just 5 minutes of journaling, if you have a way to actually access your old journals, whether you're going back and reading through them, you're using a note-taking application that actually connects ideas for you, my latest obsession, which I'll tell you about in a minute, but just being able to journal and look back at it for just 5 minutes a day can provide you with so much clarity on the different patterns that you'd otherwise not see. So I am the type of person that has to change up my habits quite frequently in order to keep the fire alive, as you could say. So sometimes I'll be really into writing by hand in a journal or paper planners, and then I'll go through phases where I'm really into digital. Well, just last week, I've started to get really into digital again, and I've been using this note-taking app called mem.ai. Not a sponsor, not affiliated whatsoever, but it is such a cool application because it's kind of like Evernote or Bear, which are two programs that I've used, but it connects ideas through AI, and you can link your notes in all these different ways. And so I've been journaling every day with specific prompts, and just the clarity I feel when I'm done from like a 3 to 5 minute writing session. I feel empowered. I feel like I've already cleared some of my guck that's on the inside. So I highly recommend trying that. Whatever appeals to you, handwriting, a digital note-taking system, speaking, and there's an app called Otter where you can just speak and it'll transcribe. That's pretty cool. I like to do that on long walks when I have ideas. So whatever works for you. And if you need help with these journaling ideas, because I know that sometimes you get there's just a blank page, you're looking at it, you have no idea what to write, journaling prompts are really helpful. You can Google some. If you have joined the Mind Love membership as an annual subscriber, you get a Trello board, which I find is the most fun way to have a journaling practice. I have a whole Trello board that I've set up with different topics, over 600 prompts, and you just drag them over to kind of plan out your week of what you want to journal about. And you can either write them right in the Trello cards, or you can write them in whatever note-taking application or planner or binder of your choice, and it's just a really inspiring way to kind of get to the depths of the things that are really helpful when it comes to your self-growth. So check out the Mind Love membership options at mindlove.com/membership because there are so many awesome bonuses. I'm going really hard with value within this membership, and the price will eventually be going up, so get in now as a founding member. You can find all of my sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. If you love this episode, share it with somebody or take a screenshot and tag me, Mind Love Melissa and Mind Love Podcast, and share it on Instagram. I love hearing from you guys, so don't hesitate to reach out on Instagram as well. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.